the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
David, welcome to the show.
Dr. Doug, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, I'm really excited. You know, you've got such an interesting background, and I know there's going to be some fascinating topics. But I know that, for instance, you were a main trainer for Tony Robbins, weren't you?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, and so give the audience kind of a little bit of background about yourself and how you went from this to that to where you've developed this company now that works not only with businesses, but with also individuals. Share with the audience that.
Sure. Going back to my roots, and it's important to understand that because I grew up in the place called the Florida Keys. And those are little dots on the end of Florida. If you haven't been there, please do yourself a favor and get to that little islands that are down there. It's just a magnificent place. And it really is a big recreational area for tourists. So all the people that were coming down, and we were in the service business. I was on a dive boat and dove most of my life, spearfishing, fishing, things like that. But the amount of people that I met, Doug, it was amazing because they were all coming from different walks of life. They all made their money, if you will, and they were coming down to vacation. And I got a chance to really, I didn't know it, but interview people at a very high level of success. And that's what started me on my journey. Is like, this is fascinating because a lot of my friends weren't being successful. They were working their butts off. They were really good people. I mean, they give you their shirt on the back, but they weren't being successful. And I was like, I've been told my whole life that if you're just good, you work hard, you're going to be successful. That's not been my experience this lifetime. As a matter of fact, my parents were some of the most loving people I've met on this planet, and they did not reach the kind of level of success that I always wanted for my life. So I knew there was a difference. So I got involved at, finance at the university level, got involved in politics, banking, then in real estate. I was the business manager for the #1 selling real estate agent in the world. I went to work for Tony Robbins, and I started my company 27 years ago with this idea that if you're really going to really understand how to become successful in this lifetime, was there a pattern? Was there a blueprint? Was there a way that we could do that? And that's what my study's been for the last 27 years.
Well, and you talk about success, and what comes to my mind is particularly living here in Thailand. I think the average monthly income is, if they're lucky, about $500 a month. And yet I see people who are so happy. And so when we talk about success, I think so often, and rightfully so, to a large degree, success is related to income and all of that type of thing. But how would you define success? Because I know you not only work with businesses very successfully, but also with individuals.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, that took probably a long time to really. Samurai Success is the name of our company. So we had success right in our name. So people were always asking me, what is your definition of success? And years ago, it was material things and money and, all the wealth and cars and houses. And what mattered was matter. And I will tell you that when I was in Miami Beach selling real estate, I was driving a 560 SL Mercedes. I was living in a $3.5 million house. I was living on the top of the world. We were traveling around the world in seminars. People were ranting and raving. They wanted our autographs. And I was so miserable, Doc. I was miserable. And I was like, this can't be what this is all about. And I'm very thankful today. I wasn't thankful at the time, but I'm very thankful for today. The universe just threw this amazing example at me going, you're on the wrong path, man. There's something else here. And so really looking at that. So when you really start taking a look at success, it doesn't matter how you want to define it. It has to have one element. That element is it has to be duplicatable. If you do success one time, you can't call it success. You call it luck. In order for something to be successful, you've got to be able to duplicate it over and over again. And that's where understanding how this place really works and the structure of success is what's the most important thing, not the thing you get from it.
So when people are not that wealthy, they don't have that many things, and yet you could deem them success. What would be the elements for those people where they could honestly say to themselves and others, yes, I have a successful life?
So there's a great book called Flow, and that is exactly the best answer I've ever seen when it comes to truly successful people. And that is, they're so in love with what they're doing that they're in flow of things. They're just masterful about it. I'm in awe when I watch people do this. And it doesn't matter what they're doing. There's a frequency that comes from it. There's an energy that comes from it, Doc, that just is fascinating to me. And this, we call this mastery, but it really is about flow. And that flow is where you just really get into a place and you don't care who's looking at you. You don't care what other people think. You don't even care what you think about it. You're just so excited about what you're doing that really shows up in everything. You actually imbue greatness into that by how you're feeling. The same thing happens when you're angry and when you're not happy. You imbue everything you're doing with that same emotional frequency. So true success, from my perspective, my opinion, is when someone really can duplicate things over and over again and be in flow.
Well, and you mentioned ego, and well, you didn't mention ego, but you mentioned things. And there's a great book out there that talks about ego and how that can be a very damaging and have a very damaging effect on us if we allow the ego to control us in a particular way. What are your thoughts about ego, and how does that compare to what you would refer to as the source of soul?
So ego is such an important part, and the ego gets a bad rep, and it deserves it, because a lot of the things you can see that are happening on the planet that we would say aren't really representation of who we are designed by the ego. There's no doubt about it. The love of money, hurting other people, all the things we could go through. But you said it so beautifully. When the ego uses you, it's a very different experience than when you use your ego. And that's what we really coach people through, is that you have another part of you that we've forgotten about, and that's your soul, your divinity. And that's a source of how you can actually create things in this lifetime. So if you use your ego, or your ego uses you, you're going to create a certain experience. If you use your soul, or your soul uses you, you're going to have a very different experience. What we really teach here at Samurai Success is how to integrate both your soul and your ego into a meaningful life, purpose-driven life. And not a lot of people talk about that because they want to push one away and not do the other. If you just play at the soul level in this physical plane, and you meditate and do great breath work and eat really well, if you sit around all day long doing those kind of things, people show up and start taking your furniture.
Yeah, and that's not easy to do.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I normally will, meditate every day. And I was just thinking about that the other day. For the last couple of weeks, I've been so busy that I have not meditated. And, I can use that as an excuse because, quite frankly, you can always find time. But, you talk about ego, you talk about the soul. And there's a lot of people that might look at that going, yeah, kind of really. But when you talk about the soul, and then you talk about, there's the soul, there's the ego, but in between covering that soul, there are so many issues that have occurred because of childhood trauma or whatever it happens to be, or our perception of what's going on or what's been said to us as children, that starts to kind of cover. I kind of use the example of a mirror. You're in the bathroom and you've just showered and you're wanting to shave or whatever, and the mirror is just totally, you can't see anything. So you have to start wiping and wiping and wiping until you get a clear view. And I look at that as though, here's all of these emotional imprints that have been put on us. And a lot of them have nothing to do with our choice. And yet what we see as reality in our lives is like a mirror that's totally fogged up. And how do you help people? And it's fascinating to me that as you're working with individuals and you're also working with businesses, and obviously we're talking about individuals, but what I want you to kind of bring that into the business too, because what I found when I was working with small businesses as a consultant was that so often if you could teach a principle in business, it also created the same principle in life.
Mhm. Absolutely great. As a matter of fact, we have this illusion that we all live under called this thing of separation, the illusion of separation, where, business, and then we got our personal lives and we got this, and we imagine ourselves being able to compartmentalize so much stuff. Truth is, what you do in one area of your life, you usually do in the other part of your life. You're just not conscious of it.
Yeah.
So bringing that awareness to business owners first. Second part is, once people understand that I don't care how much money you make, and we work with very high-end, top-line, A-type personalities that run massive businesses, and they are go-getters. But the very first thing they have to remember is that they're human just like us. And that starts putting things into perspective. And being human allows you to have access to your ego and your soul. And so many of the problems that we're dealing with in this physical plane have been manifested because we keep using our ego as source to solution. When people see that actually using your soul for source of solution and how dramatic things change for the long term, not the short term. Ego is very good at the short term, but long term, the soul is incredible and it's a great source. And so when you can tap into that inside of you as a human being, you get access to what quantum mechanics called the world of pure potentiality. And you can actually take that information from this library of information, and you can pull that information into this physical realm, heaven on earth, if you will. And you can pull solutions. And I will tell you, business owners want solutions, world-class solutions. Well, how about soul-class solutions? Because that's where you can get those from. And when you can learn to get your ego out of the way. And by the way, Joseph Campbell's work around covering the golden Buddha, the hero's journey, is very much like you said with your fogged mirror kind of beautiful analogy, Doc. I love that because that's exactly what's happening. And until you can take all that literally crap off of you that you've covered yourself up with and other people have helped cover you up with, until you can get that stuff off, you can't get yourself out of the way enough to get access to that soul because your ego wants to protect you. It wants to keep you safe. It's its job. So if it has all this trauma that you're still dealing with and you haven't healed that, then you're going to take that into the marketplace. You're going to take that into your business. You're going to take that home to your family. And the amazing thing about that is you can't give something away you don't possess. So if you have nothing but anger, that's what you're going to share with the world. If you've got nothing but peace, that's what you're going to share with the world. And if you really want to be successful in this lifetime, understanding that concept, if you want to make sure there's brownies at the Christmas party, what do you have to bring to the Christmas party? Brownies. And by understanding that, clearing that stuff up, dealing with that stuff in the past, allows you to be doing something like you and I are doing right now, being present.
Yes. Well, you talk about that and you talk about, cleaning up that mirror. And I think a lot of people are not quite sure how that happens. And I know that you have a certification in NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which is used for many things, including sales, but it's also used to help people start to clear the mirror a bit. And if you work with Tony Robbins, then I know you did some behavioral analysis as far as personality types and so forth. And there are other tools also. So what have you found with those tools that you have developed that help people, for instance, NLP or personality profiling or those type of things, or even, and you were talking about the emotions when we look at, and I think there's been a couple of individuals that have really created these emotional charts of levels. And I think of the one Abraham,
Yes, absolutely.
the emotional chart and I find it fascinating because it's so true that some people are stuck below a certain point and they just remain, as you said, in anger, or they remain in frustration, or they remain in victimhood. And how to help people to elevate that, how to help them clean up the mirror. What have you found in your experience? And do you have any stories that you can share about using the tools that you have at your disposal to help people start to clear that up and start to really be able to even reach their soul so that they can start to develop from that process?
So one of the most fascinating things I've learned along my journey is that the two parts of your brain, conscious part of your brain, the unconscious or subconscious part of your brain.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize is everything I was manifesting in my life. And by the way, you and I do the same thing. We're human. We do this. 95% of the things that you and I are attracting, manifesting, creating, discovering in our own lives comes from a part of our brain. 95% of it is being generated from your subconscious part of your brain. This is neuroscience. This isn't woo-woo spiritual kind of stuff. This is science that we are now becoming aware of how powerful we are. Oh my gosh, that means this conversation you and I are having is a very conscious conversation. Conscious conversations do not change programming. And programming is what you need to change. So imagine there's a thermostat called your subconscious that if you set it at 70 degrees and then all of a sudden it starts getting too hot, well, that thermostat tells the cooling system, hey, it's too hot in here. We're going to cool things down. If that same thermostat gets too cold, all of a sudden it says, hey, it's too cold. Let's heat things up. And you start recognizing a pattern of waves. And by the way, as I'm doing this, I'm hoping the audience is ready. Like, have you ever seen your behaviors do that? Have you ever started reaching a goal and all of a sudden self-sabotaged?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Imagine that 70 degrees is now $70,000 of income. And all of a sudden you start making 80,000. And all of a sudden your brain goes, we're too hot. We got to cool things down. And it does. And then all of a sudden you get down to $60,000 a year and it goes, hey, this is not enough. We got to heat things up. We got to go, go, go. And you do. And there's this pattern. What I'm suggesting is that the things that are going on in our world are actually being attracted by your own self-programming. And until we change that, you give yourself permission to change that, then the universe is going to keep sending you exactly what your programming is designed to do.
Well, and it's interesting, people talk about free will, agency, we have the choice. And I look at that and I think, whoa, wait a minute, because you hit it. So, 95% is subconscious. Guess what? Until we look at that, acknowledge it, recognize it, and work on it, we don't have free will. We are being controlled by our subconscious.
Yes. Forget about all these conspiracy things like the 5 families and all these craziness. It's me controlling me. Here's where free will comes into that concept of programming. What I didn't realize is that I'm not here to discover who I am. I'm not here to go find it like it's an odyssey or something else. I'm here actually to create who I am. And when you study successful people like we do here at Samurai Success, you start seeing that the people that are being successful in this physical plane are very clear about who they are, and they cannot be talked out of who they are by anyone, including themselves. And that's where you see programming really kick in, because there's a lot of people out there using a lot of discipline or ritual or motivational strategies or just free, just their willpower to be able to make things happen. But successful people are very steadily just gaining ground all the time because they're being congruent with who they say they are and the behaviors that go along with that. And that congruency is what's rewarded by the universe.
Well, and as you shared in your own journey, how you were making a tremendous amount of money. You had all of these wonderful things that showed everyone how successful you were, and you were not happy. And as you work with business leaders and as you work with individuals, how often do you see that? And how do you help them to become? How do you help them to take control and to literally change from still being successful, but having a different perspective of success? What do you do for them? And are there any stories? I'd love for some stories, if you have any that you can tell without names and so forth, that, you've worked with where people can see the dramatic change that can occur.
So I'll use one for me. That's a positive one. It's not a negative one, if you will. Okay. But I when I was younger, you couldn't get me to read to save my life. You couldn't. And one of the things that I've learned over this lifetime is that my behaviors create my results. Results over time create my destiny. And I was missing such a huge opportunity to be able to really take my knowledge base and really expand it and exchange my experience and really get out there and really start interacting with people differently because I wasn't reading. So I went in and changed my programming to love to read. And now you won't find me in a restaurant or anything else, or at 10 o'clock tonight when I get off this call. I'm going to go read for a couple of hours because it's just become such a big part of who I am. And that's a huge shift. So I want you to imagine there's something in your life that you know that if you were in real estate, for example, but you just can't make those phone calls, you just hate it, right? But you know, following up with your clients is such an important part of the behavior that creates the results you're after. If you can't change your belief about that behavior, you're never going to do it. And if you do start doing the behavior because you've learned from a coach or other talking heads on, social media saying, you got to do this, and you go do it, you're using willpower to make that happen. And if you ever have read a book, Angry, it'd be like, I'm reading this, but it doesn't get in. It's the same thing with your customers. You're making the phone calls now, you're doing the behavior, but your belief doesn't support that. And that incongruency is the opposite of what the universe rewards. The universe rewards congruency of your beliefs and your behaviors.
Well, and as we talk about behavior and talk about, that subconscious creating our behaviors, which creates the results. And, as I was working with very small businesses, never to your level, one of the things I talk about is, let's look at what are you trying to achieve, and let's go back and work backwards instead of forwards to the point where, okay, what do you have to change within your belief system? And what you have to change internally in order to do that. I had a friend and a client that was just making really, he was so frustrating. And he came to me, he says, Doug, I'm just making such stupid decisions. And he says, I can't figure it out. And I go, okay, so let's do this. So we used some NLP. And we went back to his childhood and discovered that there was a time that he had in school really been, quote, bullied by the teacher and told that his perception was, he was stupid, he was no good. And once we cleared that up and reframed that to understand that, okay, it's the teacher that's stupid and is a bully, all of a sudden he changed his whole approach in his company. He started making more money than he had ever made. And it had everything to do with going back and changing that programming that he had experienced. Awesome. So the challenge, I think, for people, I look at it as an addiction. We talk about alcohol, tobacco, drugs, all those addictions. I look at our behavior based on those subconscious imprints as an addiction. And how on earth do you help someone? Because you know how difficult it is to overcome an addiction. How do you help someone that says, okay, I'm going to do this? And you say, all right, well, this is what you need to do. You need to read more. You need to do this. And they start to do it and then they stop. And why? Because that subconscious is stronger than this intentional consciousness that they're trying to do. How do you help people to change the weight to the point where they really start to overcome that subconscious?
This has been our quest for the last 27 years and even longer. I didn't realize I was on the path for that. So there's 4 major ways that you can actually change your subconscious. Several we've already talked about. Hypnosis is a big one of those. Yeah. And some hypnosis works on some people and some it doesn't. NLP, Psych K are both great technologies to be able to help people make that change. Practice is the big one we study here at Samurai Success. When you practice something over and over again, because there's an adage out there that says practice makes perfect.
Yes.
We know that's not accurate. We know that practice makes permanent. And so when you practice something really good, you're practicing something permanent that's going to last. When you practice something really poorly, you're practicing for permanency for poor results, like that gentleman making poor decisions. That was his practice. But it stemmed, here's the really cool part that you tapped into, which is this next one, which is about being in love. Love takes that dynamic of 5%, manifestation and 95% manifestation, and it turns it on its head. You actually, when you're in love with another person or with yourself or with what you're doing, it takes your ability to take your conscious part of your brain and you start manifesting from that 95% of the time. It's called the honeymoon effect. It's beautiful to watch, but it's very short-lived for most people. So we took all 4 of those elements and we then created a new technology we call the I Am Studio. And that's what we work here with our clients on. So even though they're business owners and they're doing all this great, things around material stuff, Once you have an identity about who you are, it focuses the lens of that identity on everything you do. And so that gentleman that you talked about in the past created, or helped from the teacher, created a self-identity about he was not smart, he was stupid. And that moved forward all the way through. And that lens that we're talking about. So if I said to you, hey, I'm a glass half empty person, or I'm a glass half full person, either one of those identities are going to create two different realities, experiences, results, and destiny. Your identity creates all those things. And that identity has either been created by you, which we teach here at Samurai Success, or it's been created by others.
Yeah, and that's where you're taking control. And I think that's so important to realize, that you have the ability to be in control rather than to be in the effect of external sources.
Beautifully said, sir.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. And, it's interesting to me that, you talk about the activity that if you keep doing, you keep doing, you keep doing, and I get into this whole point of, and it's kind of a contradiction there, because if you keep doing, I've always asked the question, did this individual do what he did so he could become, or did he do what he did because he was, as you said, the I am?
Beautiful.
And yet we talk about neuroscience. And, again, as we think about those imprints, what we've done is we have created neurological pathways in our brain that becomes an addiction. That's just how we're going to respond. That's just how we're going to respond. And yet, as you talk about changing that consciously by starting to do things a little bit differently, aren't you really changing the neural pathways, or at least setting them aside and creating stronger ones that now become a habit? But it's a habit now of positivity rather than subconscious negativity.
That's the beautifulness, and forgive me for those people who are dealing with some really big addictions that are listening to this. That's the power of understanding addictions. Once you understand addictions, right? We get addicted to drugs, we get addicted to alcohol, and I could go through a list of things. You can also be addicted to being successful. You can also be addicted to be able to go into the gym. You could also be addicted to eating really, really good stuff for your body. Use that addiction as opposed to your addiction using you. And you're on the path to very different level of success.
Yes, and I love that. There are positive addictions, and the challenge when you get into the negative addictions is that it isn't the addiction itself; it's something even deeper subconsciously that has created a need to cover through the use of drugs or alcohol or whatever that happens to be. And so it isn't just a matter of overcoming the addiction. It's, in order to do that, you've got to figure out what's the root cause.
Let's imagine that you're going along and all of a sudden this emotion comes up. And by the way, there's 34,000 different emotions that we could deal with, right? Most of us know about 6 of them, right? We constantly do over and over again. We're addicted to 6. So let's imagine that your body has this amazing feedback loop that says, whenever your beliefs do not support and are not congruent, they're not in integrity with your behaviors, your beliefs and your behaviors are not in alignment. There's a very specific emotion that happens. It's called suffering. Suffering is your body telling you, hey, your beliefs and your behaviors are not in alignment. Most of us want to suppress that suffering, as opposed to, hey, this is just an alarm clock. There's something I want to change here. There's something I want to do differently here. And that all of a sudden we suppress that suffering by using some kind of addictive thing to cover it up. And all of a sudden that alignment becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just becomes out of control. We start losing purpose. We start losing faith, hopelessness, everything else kicks in there. So there's a real doom loop that happens when you get into that kind of cycle of things. So it works positively and negatively, but if you can take control over it, you can decide that future.
Well, and you mentioned the word purpose. You know what comes to my mind, because I've interviewed so many people that talk about, well, you need to find your purpose. And again, the question that comes to my mind is, do you just have to really focus on, I need to find my purpose, I need to find my purpose? Or as you start to become as you start to really come from the soul, that your purpose reveals itself.
And it's so fascinating because I know we talk on these great concepts, like that was so beautifully said. What I'm going to suggest to you is that I understand this from a due perspective because this is what I've been studying for so many years. And it's going to sound so easy, and it's not. It's a lot of work. What I'm suggesting to you is that there's this realm of pure potentiality, all possibilities of you being homeless, being rich, being president of the United States, and every single other potentiality exists in this realm. And what attracts that particular particle of possibility to you is the frequency that you're emulating. And that frequency you're emulating comes from this. Your identity over time creates consistency. Consistency over time creates congruency. Congruency over time creates coherence. And coherence over time creates a frequency. And that frequency is the focal point of your attractor factor. You individually are attracting things into your life based upon that frequency. So if you do not know who you are, then you're creating just the opposite of that.
Well, and I think that's for someone to suddenly become aware. If they can just sit back for a minute, or, as I've heard so many times and talked about it, step outside of yourself. If you can, step outside of yourself and observe, what are you experiencing, and recognize that you're a magnet. As you say, the frequency that you were putting out is drawing in the similar frequency. And if it's not what you want, guess what? It's your responsibility to change it. No one else can change it for you. You can blame this, you can blame that, but the reality is that frequency. And I think quantum physics has become such an fascinating study and scientific validity to understand these things.
Yes. And that's so beautifully said, is that you're not here discovering your destiny. You're actually attracting your destiny. And that's all based upon who you say you are. And if that identity has been created by other people, then other people are actually creating your destiny for you. And you're probably not going to like that. Get back in control, take that responsibility. And it's hard. I know it, Doc. I know what I'm saying so effortlessly, but I've been studying this for so long. I'm on the other side of it. And I'm just sharing with you that I hear you, but there's another way. And that other way is really taking a different control and creating a totally different experience that most of us say that we really are after.
Well, and I love how you use the example of we are either creating ourselves or someone else is creating it. And I look at that, I've interviewed a few people recently that talk about imposter syndrome, and their definition is, I'm a failure, and they try to go, but I'm always a failure. And I look at it and go, no, imposter syndrome to me is that you are living someone else's life. Someone else is controlling your life because of those subconscious beliefs. They're literally doing that. So,
Stop reading my mind, Doc.
Well, we won't get into that. But anyway, you've written a book, Swords of Illumination. Talk about the book a little bit. What motivated you to write it? And what's the main point of the book, or multiple points of the book?
So we've been talking about the main focal point of the book the whole time. As a matter of fact, this book is my understanding about all the different elements that make up what we call programming. And there are, in the first book, 6 swords, and you learn about the 7th one. We're writing the second book now, but combined, they're our coaching system, which creates 12 swords. Well, I say create. We've understood that we've downloaded 12 different elements that really make up this subconscious programming. And once you understand those, you can pick and choose about which ones to work from and start seeing the changes for yourself, because none of this is going to matter. All this conceptual stuff you and I are talking about, Doc, won't matter until you have your own personal verified experience.
Right.
But that's what's so great about the book, is that in the book, it isn't me telling you something. It's about a fable, a great story of a young man who wants to be able to become what he knows as being samurai. And early in my life, I had so many wonderful people, like I said, growing up in the Keys, and all these mentors and people sharing me stuff. But I will never forget the person who said, the greatest life you could ever live, you have my attention, go. He says, was being in service of others. Samurai, loosely translated, means in service of others. So this is where the concept came from, being samurai, truly being in service. And here at Samurai Success, we teach people about how to get the hell out of your own way so you can truly be in service to others, and then download from that source, that pure potentiality. And that book is really maybe our first awareness about really how to make those changes.
Well, and you talk about the 12 swords, and I don't know if you have those memorized, but could you share very quickly and briefly what those swords are? Obviously, someone's going to have to read the book to understand the depth of it. But,
Sure.
but on the surface, what are those swords?
So let's go with just the very first, and I'll talk about maybe 3 of them if we have time. But
Okay.
the very first sword is the sword of identity. Right from the beginning, everything you and I have been talking about is this sets the stage for everything. If you do not know who you are, or someone else has created who you are and you're living that life, knowing what you want in this physical plane is nearly impossible. It's only until you really understand who you are, when this doesn't change, what you want doesn't keep changing. And I meet people all the time. They're all indecisive. They procrastinate. Well, that's exactly who you actually are in your programming. Your subconscious programming is telling you that's your identity. That's why you're living it perfectly. You're living it by design. And so once you understand that, you go, I would like to change my results. Well, then you have to change your belief about who you are, which is your identity.
Okay.
Second one really is about understanding roles and distinctions. So you have this identity, but you also have role distinctions throughout your life. Like, I'm not a coach all the time. I have to go home and I'm a husband, or I'm a friend, or I'm a lover. And if I'm a coach in any of those other areas, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. So having those role distinctions apart from my identity is something really important. And the book goes through really clear examples about how to really take that and how to make it practical.
Okay. And what's the third sword?
Sword is about the thing about outcomes. So the sword of outcomes, you said it earlier. Once you understand what it is you're really after, you can actually work backwards and be able to say, okay, if that's the result I'm after, then certain behaviors are going to help me get that result sooner. For example, reading, like we talked about earlier, is going to help me with the knowledge base that I need to be able to get to that level of success that I want to be able to do. And not reading is not. It's going to slow me down. So reading is the behavior that's going to get me to the results. What is the belief I have to have about reading? Well, if I continue my belief about reading that I don't like it, guess what? I'm not going to do it. But if I can teach myself to fall in love with reading, then you're not going to be able to stop me. And I can change my programming to believe I love something that I didn't used to like. Broccoli is next on my list.
Well, you know what's fascinating is curiosity. As you talk about reading, which is an element of curiosity to learn more. And so often, as I've talked to different people about this, curiosity is such an important element in order to make that change. But you talk about the 12 swords in the book, but you also have mentioned something about 5 questions that we all have to answer in this lifetime. And how do we answer those? And what are those questions?
So the very first one is, who am I? Is the very first question you have to ask as a human being. So there are 5 primary questions that go along with that. So who am I? Where did I come from? And by the way, if you believe you came from an evolutionary process of being from animals, and that's where our ego would say, hey, by the way, this body is based upon animal DNA. There's no doubt about it. But there's also the soul component here. And that's the differentiation. I don't have to let my animal side dictate what I'm going to do. I have this soul that I can use to be able to say, yes, I would do that from an animal perspective, but I can choose something differently. That's that free will aspect that you and I are talking about.
Okay.
That third question, why am I here? This is the grand question of all philosophers. And when you understand that we're really here from a soul perspective to be able to have experiences of things, not knowledge base or any of those other things, it's truly about understanding experiences. So who I am, where did I come from? Why am I here? Where is this location? I'm located in this physical plane called the earth. And in this physical plane, there's a lot of dichotomy that happens, the law of contrast, the ups and the downs, the lefts and the rights. And we have this unbelievable ability to have the superpower as human beings to create meaning behind stuff. That means that if it's up or down, I get to choose the meaning behind things. And then the 5th question is, now that I know those other 4 questions, what do I plan to do with all those? And that's where your life purpose really comes through.
Yeah. Well, and that's where you're taking personal responsibility
Also,
comes in, and realizing that, you know what, I can choose, I can create. And as I love the concept, I can write my own movie. I can create the movie of my life if I choose to.
Doc, if I could just say one other thing about that, is that not only can you do it, you are doing that.
Yes.
You cannot avoid this. If your life is a comedy or it's a trauma or a drama or any, you are creating it, and you can change that if you wish.
Yes, and I love that. So as we come to a close, and it's so fascinating to me when we get into these great conversations that time has gone by. So what would be kind of that message that you'd like to share with the audience that they take away from this whole conversation?
I know I've said this in lots of different ways, but let me see if I can really sum it up. One of the most powerful lessons I've learned in this entire lifetime, that's 58 years of being here. I know it's such a short time, but I've really been mentored and coached by some of the most phenomenal people on the planet. But the single most important lesson I've learned like this lifetime is I'm not here to discover who I am. I'm here to create who I am. And that has made a huge difference. And I will tell you, if you look at any celebrity, anybody you admire, or anybody else that has fame or fortune or success on this planet, they know this technology because they're creating themselves over and over, and they're doing the things that are in alignment with that identity. When you understand this concept, and if you don't understand it, grab that book because it'll really help you understand it. But if you don't understand that, that's the breakthrough that you've probably been waiting for.
Yeah, love it. And so how do they find the book?
Amazon.com, or even audio. It's actually on apple.com right now as well. And we just moved into a bestseller list. So
good for you. And I love the audio. That
yes.
You know, when we think about all the time we spend driving different places and so forth, or, you know, even as I'm doing walking meditation and decide, you know what, I want to learn a little bit and sit and listen. I think, you know, for me, listening works so much better than reading.
Perfect. It's available for you.
Great. And how do people find your website?
SamuraiSuccess.com is the best way to reach us, which gives you a full, by the way, if you really like some of this information, we have over 150 videos there for you on these little segments of little things, shorts, longs, things like this. So please have fun, enjoy, but SamuraiSuccess.com is your best source.
Great. David, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Doc, thanks so much.
And I appreciate your insights. And folks, I hope you've enjoyed this one. This has been a great one for me. So please join us again soon. And please go to the website, get this book, because I think it can help open up some really interesting concepts for you. So this is Dr. Doug saying namaste.